Alright, this one was actually, a bit, it was kind of somewhat suggested to me. And as soon as I saw it, it kind of made sense. So, I just decided to go ahead and roll with it. And basically, I guess, where we're really coming from is, it's basically how, horrible disorders, find romance. So, we have what happens when someone with bipolar falls in love and someone with OCD falls in love. And obviously, it may not go conventionally. Not to mention, both of these are winners of the Best Actress Oscar and Best Picture nominees. So, yeah. They go nicely together, I think. I think we'll start with Silver Linings Playbook. That's the one probably most people are currently most familiar with. As Good as It Gets was The Bee's Knees in 1997. I remember when this whole image, I remember just, this movie was a big deal back then. And that was the year of Titanic, so it was a big deal to be a big deal in 1997 if you weren't Titanic. But in the meantime, we have Silver Linings Playbook, which basically, while we're on the Best Actress Oscar win, obviously, this is kind of something that really helped propel kind of Jennifer Lawrence into that spotlight she's in now. Obviously, The Hunger Games had come out earlier this year, but then this on top of it, kind of, you have this gigantic franchise and your first Oscar win in 1 year. You're pretty much good to go. Regardless of the backlash she's seen lately, mostly for idiotic reasons, so it's all good. I'm not even like a hardcore fan of hers. I just like her enough to realize that most of the hate that she gets is unwarranted.
Right.
And pointless. And because she was an it girl at one point. And still kind of is, but not near to the extent that she was when all these were coming out. And this is David O. Russell's follow-up to The Fighter. It was his follow-up to The Fighter and right before American Hustle. Like, he did this and American Hustle almost one right after the other. Or one right after the other for sure, but I mean, like, almost literally. Like, as soon as this one stopped, that one started. And it's based on a book that I actually read before I saw it, that he took some freedoms with, but we'll get there. The interesting thing about this movie is that, in true David O. Russell fashion, it has a lot of heavy subject matter, but it's mostly a comedy. Which I don't know if that would be off-putting to people, or if most people embraced it. It's definitely, weirdly enough, it's this R-rated David O. Russell movie about mental illness, and it's a crowd pleaser. This is very much a crowd-pleasing movie.
Oh yeah.
Weirdly enough, and it really kind of depends. It kind of depends on your frame of mind, I guess, how you go into this movie, because this movie faced a lot of criticism, especially in the Oscar season, that I can't exactly counter, regardless of how much I like the movie personally. And that is that, honestly, regardless of some of that heavy subject matter, structure-wise, this is basically any other romantic comedy. Mm-hmm. It really is.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very, like, there's some things that are very, Capra is a strong word, but there are some scenes that feel a bit Capra, especially the final scene. Just take the profanity out, of course. And the way it's played is it almost feels kind of risky, to play up Pat's bipolar disorder as, for comedic value. But of course, they do have a nice balance here, and Bradley Cooper, who obviously scored his own Oscar nomination, his first of 3 in a row, 4 if you count producing, is very, very earned here, because there's this balance that he finds, and both he and Russell working together find this balance, and it's very interesting the way it can be portrayed in one way and portrayed in another way in a different scene. Take, for instance, when he first gets to the house, and the first thing he does, he wants Nikki's syllabus. He has to go to the library and get all the books that she's reading for her class. and he's reading, I think it's A Farewell to Arms, and he reads the whole thing in one sitting, and then throws a holy shit fit about how everything, because the weird thing about him is he's this kind of, I struggle to figure out what the what the proper term would be for this. So many terms I would not consider a mentally ill person, but he is Pat Solidano. That is who he is, and we know who he is. And it's a bit odd given some of his traits that he's it's all about, his disorder, obviously, but he's trying so hard to be optimistic and see all the great things in life, hence the title.
Right.
And he really, really wants that optimism. And when A Farewell to Arms ends the way it does, which we all know, he gets really, really unhappy about it and very, very angry. I love the shot of him. He literally closes the book and says, "What the fuck?" and throws it through the window in the attic.
That was great.
And goes into their room at 3 a.m. to complain about it, his parents' bedroom. And at this point, his disorder is played for comedy. Because it's humorous that he's that pissed off about A Farewell to Arms to the point that he's going to wake his parents up at 3 a.m. to rant about it. But then there are other scenes, like the wedding video that he can't find, where we see the real dark side of it. And what it is, not just to have it, but to be living with somebody, or love somebody, that's going through this, and how hard that can be in itself. Which we'll get to Jackie Weaver in a minute. I really want to talk about her. And this wedding video scene is really, really, it starts off, it's just, Pat's being ridiculous again, he's throwing another shit fit, he'll get over it eventually. But this scene really, really escalates, in a dramatic way. That, of course, in Russell fashion, always finds a kind of comedy layer to it, with De Niro chasing the kid with the camera. There's always something like that. The kid with the camera, I believe, is Russell's actual son, who actually suffers from this, so it all ties together. Or some form of this, I'm not quite sure on that. So it's very interesting to see how they kind of have that balance there, where they can portray it in a funny way, because they balance it out with showing how serious and, just difficult it is to live with and deal with and stuff like that. And then he ends up meeting Tiffany, who is Lawrence's character, and then obviously from then on it's a romance movie, pretty much. And the thing about it is the way that they, not just, she and Cooper obviously have just kind of a natural chemistry going on in general. That's why they've done 3 or 4 movies together now. But the way that their relationship plays out in this movie, I kind of like how different it is from the normal setup, because typically, I don't know, there's all the meet cute movies, but typically anymore, we're stuck on that cliche where the two people meet and immediately they hate each other, so that they can eventually love each other, which is fucking dumb and played out. So it's always very interesting to me that Pat and Tiffany actually connect immediately at the dinner table with John Ortiz and Julia Stiles, when they bond over their problems and medications. And they just kind of immediately hit it off. And then they hate each other, almost immediately after this. It's a very interesting kind of switch at play here. And just the whole thing about how, obviously, given the way he is, his tact is non-existent. Because the whole point is that Tiffany's husband, Tommy, has just died. Has been killed he got hit by a car while he was shopping for her, we end up learning. But for a while we don't know. And so John Ortiz is telling him, Tommy died, and don't mention it. And the first thing he says when Tiffany walks in is, "Hi, how you doing? How'd Tommy die?" That's another one of those cases where he can't help it, but there's just such a comedic factor the way it's put into this scene, and adds to the situation. And he continues to be extremely untactful when it comes to Tommy, when they're outside her house and she's basically trying to seduce him, and he's saying, "I can't, I'm married," and she says, "So am I," and his response is, "No, that doesn't make sense, he's dead." And then we see how complicated Tiffany's character is in this one gesture where she hugs him, almost like she's going to start crying, but she just slaps him and walks away instead. Just confusing the holy shit out of him. I do like in particular when she's hugging him and he actually says, "What is happening? I don't even know what's happening anymore." So it's very interesting. We kind of have that back and forth with them through the whole movie, pretty much. Like, one minute we see the love forming, and the next minute, they kind of legitimately hate each other. Like, it's not just this, oh, we're gonna like each other eventually thing. Like, there's some venom in these two towards each other for quite some time throughout the movie. Until he finds out that they basically kind of need each other. She feels like that she needs him, and he obviously needs her because she's a direct contact with Nikki, which is basically just what he's going to use her for. Which is where the dance thing comes in, which, like I said, it really depends on your frame of mind how you take some of the developments this movie takes. And then, of course, there's the whole football aspect of it, where we get De Niro. De Niro getting a really good part that he's needed for quite some time. I mean, Everybody's Fine was 3 years before this, I think. And that was a good role for him, but not many people saw it. But with here, he was able to bring out, because he has a lot of different things here. He gets to do, a lot of people, this is weird, a lot of people, as much love as he has over the years, I guess a lot of people like to criticize De Niro for being a not so good crier on camera.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that.
But I kind of disagree with that, especially in this. Like, that scene in the attic, I do realize that the scene in the attic is basically your standard Oscar clip scene.
Right.
But even so, I do really think he owns that scene well. And there's a lot of scenes where he's really angry, which comes from his whole thing about the remotes and the handkerchief and all his superstitions. But also, on top of all of this, there's also a real warmth to him, too, that's not missing. And obviously this was his first Oscar nomination since Cape Fear.
Wow, it really has been.
21 years prior.
Second time Cape Fear has been mentioned on the network this weekend.
And not to mention also, it's another case where when De Niro was doing press for this, much like Russell, where he's coming from here comes from a real place, like a place from his personal life, I guess. I'm not quite sure exactly what that story is, but I know, like, I guess he has somebody in his life that's dealt with this or something similar to this, so it really kind of hit in a really real place for him, and that really comes through in this performance. And then we get to Jackie Weaver, who obviously got a lot of criticism because of her Oscar nomination. For basically, I believe the most common description of Jackie Weaver's performance in this was wallpaper. As soon as I saw the movie the first time when we went out of town to see it,
right,
she struck me immediately, and that was about a couple of weeks before nominations when she was completely off the radar. It was just the main three. And then people got really angry about her getting nominated. Like, it was a coattail nomination just because the movie did well, because everything was getting nominated for it. And I think her nomination's really deserved, because she doesn't. There's a lot of things that she has to convey here while, kind of being in the background a lot. Where she's kind of, because not only is she dealing with Pat, but De Niro's behavior as well is something that's not easy to live with. And she's a woman that should be at the end of her rope, but she's always right here doing her thing. And she's got some really, obviously she gets to do the crying scene. She's got a bit of anger while the parlay's going on. But then, there's also just little tiny moments with her, like the moment when De Niro loses his envelope because Pat took it, and he's just freaking out because he lost an envelope in a stack of envelopes. And just that delivery of, maybe we should call the FBI. Just any time she's on screen, my attention's drawn to her. And I really appreciate that nomination, actually, because that's exactly what it is. A supporting performance. It really speaks for itself. Because she really kind of, with her having to deal with all the other, like, everybody's kind of dealing with Pat, but she's kind of dealing with everybody else. So she's kind of the thing that ties everything together in one place here. So yeah, and I thought she handled all that really well, and she's not just kind of. I never really saw her as like completely in the background. So, and plus she's making Krabby Stacks and homemades.
Of course.
Obviously, nobody still knows what that is. But she's explaining the recipe to Chris Tucker at the very end, but we catch her like in the middle of it. So
Has Russell ever said anything about what they really are?
I doubt it.
It seems like something he would be asked. I was wondering if he had an answer. I can't remember if
it's something in the book or not. Well, as far as the book, obviously, from what I remember, which is vague, the book, I actually own the book, so I can probably take a look again, but, it's pretty much the same setup for the first half, but then in the second half, in true Russell fashion, he just took all liberties. He just did whatever he wanted to do. Like, the dance stuff is in there and all that stuff, but, like, the betting and the parlay and stuff like that, I think, is all stuff Russell added.
Do you remember how the book ended?
If I remember correctly, it's actually a little ambiguous as whether or not they end up together. Because I believe the last scene of the book is, like, just them laying there, and they're, like, kind of... We don't know if it's a platonic thing or a romantic thing, or it's whether they're going to be together or whether they're not. That's how I remember. I don't remember for sure if that's how it was.
Right.
That's how I remember it. Another thing to point out that's very interesting is there's a few things. I was actually going to... As I was saying that sentence, I was going to go in one direction, and then I kind of changed my mind. It was going to go in another. So this might be interesting. It might not be. I don't know. What's very interesting also about Pat's character is the way that he's so driven by Nikki, who is mostly an unseen presence. We see her in the flashback and then obviously in the final scene. But it's how his character reacts and the things that he says and does of the grasp we get on her. Like, we have an idea of her already because she was banging that other teacher in the shower while he was, supposedly away. And we may or may not, kind of side with Pat for almost beating the guy to death, depending on what side you come from. But then you start to realize more and more things about their relationship as the movie goes on, and maybe... Because for a while, we just had to take Pat's word for it, that they're like this great couple. Well, we kind of know we probably can't trust what Pat is saying entirely in regards to their relationship. And then there's one line that's just thrown in there really, really quickly, and Tiffany kind of catches it, but then it's never really brought up. That kind of says everything we need to know about where he and Nikki were before this even happened. Which is when he's saying, he's defending because Tiffany wants to know what their relationship was and why she is the ultimate. And he's just kind of saying, all the routine stuff. She's amazing, and she's this, and we connected, we were electric. And then he gets to the point to where he says, we would fight sometimes. That's what happens. Couples fight. I mean, she'd go away for a couple of weeks, and it'd all be good. It's like, wait a minute, a couple of weeks? And then you're like, I don't think this relationship... I mean, we already know the relationship's not what he thinks it is. But it might go beyond that. This might really not be the relationship he thinks it is. To a completely point of no return degree. Long since past, even. And I just like how those kind of little clues are thrown in there to kind of show what we're really dealing with and what Pat's perspective of what we're dealing with is, and how totally and completely different they are. Another great thing is obviously one thing that got a big spotlight on it as this movie was coming out in the award season was the ensemble. Because I pointed out, obviously we have all our main characters, but then we have, like I said, John Ortiz is his friend Ronnie, who I love. Anytime he has to pull Pat to the side and talks about how much he hates his life, it's hilarious. I love John Ortiz in general so much. Julia Stiles, she used to be a big deal. When we were in the late 90s, early 2000s there, she was kind of like the big thing, and now this has kind of been, outside of a Bourne movie, this has kind of been her most significant role in a while in movies. I think she's mostly on TV now or something. That's generally where they are when they disappear. But she has that, the kind of uptight sister vibe going with Lawrence's character, and I kind of like their back and forth, mostly in that dinner scene. Like I said, we really don't get much of her, but she basically establishes that character we all kind of know in real life. We don't like too much, but she means well. And then there is his psychiatrist Cliff is a really good character because he kind of starts off as that one, just that normal doctor character, but then it turns into I'm gonna wear my Deshaun Jackson jersey to dinner, and Deshaun Jackson is the man. And then it turns out he's like one of the really hardcore fans of the game that like paints his face and takes his shirt off. We have all these different side characters here. The cop is a good character. He only shows up like 3 times, but I like him as well. And then of course Chris Tucker, who just keeps coming in and out of the movie and keeps getting taken back to the hospital and reappearing and taken back to the hospital and really kind of jazzes up the dancing scene, the black it up Pat thing. Being very, he goes from, hey, I'm Chris Tucker, I haven't been in a movie since like Rush Hour 3, and I'm just appearing in this Best Picture nominee now, and everything's great, and I'm kind of downplayed. Then as soon as he's in those dancing scenes, you're like, there's the Chris Tucker we know. There's the Chris Tucker from The Fifth Element. There's Smokey.
Yes.
There's Beaumont Livingston. There's whoever the fuck he was in Money Talks. I think that's his whole filmography. I think we went through the whole thing.
Maybe.
Because he has not been in very many movies. He's only just returned. He's in Billy Lynn. We're going to see him again soon. So yes, I'm sure the cast is so big. I'm sure there's people I'm forgetting too. But Paul Herman, Randy, the guy that's taking everybody's money, is really good here too. Like, he seems to be one of those guys that like, he's like a guy that Russell knows in real life, and basically just kind of brought him in to just do his thing. That's how he comes off. So yeah, that's another thing that really kind of gives this movie its personality, is it's so many side characters that stand out. Shea Wiggum's his brother. I really like that directorial choice from Russell too, where it's they have the pictures on the wall, but Shea Wiggums is up and Bradley Cooper's is kind of on the ground. So you kind of know which one's the more kind of successful one. And then when he's actually introduced in person later, I always kind of like that shot where we hear his voice off screen, and the camera, instead of cutting to him, cuts to the picture of him on the wall and then pans over to him. I always thought that was a really cool kind of introductory thing. Mm. So all of that ties it together really well. Obviously, speaking of tying things together really well, the editing is surprisingly really on point here, which I believe was another one of its many Oscar nominations.
Yes.
It's a Best Picture nominee, of course. There's a good chance, but for real, it's actually quite. It moves everything really quickly. I always forget how long this movie is. The movie is 2 hours and 2 minutes, which it does not feel like.
No. It
feels like at least an hour 40 or 45. I always forget that it barely passes 2 hours. And not just that as far as the editing is concerned, but also, like I said, there's the idea of cutting to Shea Wiggum's picture instead of him first. I always thought was really clever. And the way it kind of some of the scenes get really heavily edited when things start getting super chaotic is a really nice technique also. And it's very and yeah, like I said, it is very much a romantic comedy, kind of clean cut. But the performance is really kind of elevated above the genre that it's in. On top of, like I said, the way they handle the subject matter, and sometimes really funny, sometimes really serious ways that pretty much can probably only be balanced by Russell. If anybody else tried that, very, very few, I think, would succeed. Especially in the way that he does. And then the ending comes along, and it feels like it kind of jumps the shark with the parlay. With bringing in the gambling and the dance competition. Mm-hmm. And it just so happens that this one thing is happening and then this other thing, and how they need to get at least 5 points, and they just happen to get exactly 5 points. It's a very like, come on, Russell, at least do 5.1. That'd be more like you. Just something. And though I do like, like they spend the whole movie practicing the big move, And then the ending comes, they fuck up the big move. That's kind of that's those little things that they kind of try to turn the genre on its head a little and kind of throw expectations out the window just a little tiny bit. But then there's stuff like Tiffany's whole problem at the climax when she says that she's gonna get into the dance competition by lying and telling him that Nikki's gonna be there. And then Nikki actually shows up, and it's a whole ordeal for Tiffany. I feel like that would have been more effective if it weren't for the fact that by this point, we already know that Pat knows she's lying. Because we see him take out the letter and realize what's happening before the climax happens. And so that kind of kills kind of anything that was supposed to do with the surprise of Nikki actually showing up. Because it's like, I get why Tiffany's freaking out, but at the same time, we can't really join her because we already know that Pat knows she's lying, so what's even the point of this from a storytelling standpoint? I don't know. But even so, like I said, it does a lot to really rise above its genre, and one thing that also really makes it stand out is it kind of felt like an instant classic, almost. It already has a bit of a classic feel to it. Like I said, it's just, throw in mental illness and profanity, but other than that, it does feel kind of like a classic romance. Like I said, especially the climax when he goes after Tiffany and they do the thing and there's the Christmas lights and the zoom out and all that. It feels that's kind of the moment that feels very Capra-like, probably because of the Christmas lights, but still. But yes, and yes, I do think that, obviously people like to hate on Lawrence for winning the Oscar, but I do think it's deserved. She would have been my personal choice of the nominees.
I agree.
But not overall. I know people have that fucking hard on for Reva because of fucking Haneke, but fuck them. Fuck it all. Fuck them or fuck them.
Yes. He says it, so I don't have to.
Sorry. Real quick, I say that every time and I end up dragging it on. But I'll try real quick to go and do as good as it gets now. Like I said, a movie that was really big when it came out. Everybody fell in love with this movie. It's another one of those crowd-pleasing romantic comedies. And when it starts off, it's very interesting when you know kind of the history of it, because the movie begins and it's Jack Nicholson egging on a dog, and then he decides he's trying to stop the dog from pissing on the wall. So he picks up the dog, and the dog starts pissing, and he's carrying around this pissing dog, and eventually he throws it down the laundry chute. And you're watching this image of Jack Nicholson holding this pissing dog, where it's going everywhere, and you're thinking, this movie won him an Oscar and was nominated for Best Picture.
Yeah, that's weird.
And that's its opening scene. But then you remember The Full Monty ran for Best Picture this year as well. And you're like, okay, male stripper comedy, dog pissing, okay, I guess we're about good. We'll let it slide. But the thing about it, though, is that this movie gets away with so much, in a good way. I don't mean this gets away with other people, I mean this gets away in general with some of the things it does because it stars Jack Nicholson, and because it's Jack Nicholson doing these things. If As Good As It Gets came out today, I do not think it would be beloved by anybody, except for a small few. And I say this because of Melvin Udall's character. Now you'll notice that the whole idea is that he's like a Scrooge, he's a Grinch, he's OCD and real grouchy all the time and hates everybody and just stays in his apartment and tries to write.
Right.
There's a scene very, very reminiscent of The Shining, when Greg Kinnear comes knocking on his door while he's trying to write. And he goes through this whole stuff about all the things that could go down, but regardless, Greg Kinnear should not interrupt his writing for any reason whatsoever. Like if you hear a thud and then you smell something that can only be a decomposing corpse. That's a paraphrase of a really great line that I can't fully remember, but it's which is the case for a lot of Melvin Udall's dialogue. And the reason I say I'm not quite sure how this would go today is Melvin Udall's supposed to be the guy we want to see turn around, and we want to see find love, and he's happy with Verdell, and he and Simon become really good friends, and everything's great. But when this movie starts, Melvin Udall is every kind of racist, homophobic, anything you can think of, and he will let you know in any way possible. Sexist, everything. Any ist, Melvin Udall is that. Starting with the introduction of Cuba Gooding Jr. as Greg Kinnear's boyfriend. It's kind of loose on exactly what Frank's relationship is with Simon, but I think we're supposed to assume that he might be his boyfriend. He looks after him, we know that. But he's talking about him, and he describes Frank as colored like thick molasses.
That would never fly nowadays.
Oh, we're not done.
Oh, I know. It's just the beginning.
And then there is when the girl freaks out because she loves his writing. That really famous line when she says, "How do you write women so well?" And he says, "I think of a man and take away reason and accountability."
I remember that being in the trailer, actually.
And then so many, I can't even think of any specific things, but pretty much any line he says to Greg Kinnear in the first 45 minutes is something extremely homophobic. I believe the term fudge pusher is in there at some point, and that's just one of them.
Oh, wow.
And this is all in the first, half hour. And this is the guy we want to see have a turnaround. In 2016, I don't think anybody would be on this guy's side. But we'll get more into Melvin Udall, what he would be like in 2016 in a second. But to go on, to talk about just how many... I mean, I don't like to base, what movie's greatest just on this. But when so many lines that are so memorable can come out of one character in one movie. This is one of those cases where, any average moviegoer could probably quote at least half of Melvin Udall's lines. Because there was, when he first gets to the restaurant, the people who talk in metaphors ought to shampoo my crotch. Just all these really recognizable quotes. Good times, noodle salad. Even when he's not even saying anything, when he does the very Nicholson thing, when he has his sunglasses up here, and he just moves his eyebrows and they fall down on his face. There's also when he slams the door in the woman's face when he says, "So crazy someplace else, we're all stocked up here." There's just all the quotable lines from Melvin Udall. The list is endless. But then we get to a point to where the racism, the sexism, the homophobia, all this stuff, he finally realizes that he crosses a line. Even the animal abuse, to an extent. Because Verdell could have really gotten hurt going down the garbage chute. But the time he finally realizes he crossed a line is when he insults Helen Hunt, who is basically his kind of... the only thing he's got, really. He will not be waited on anybody else in that restaurant except for her. He will not sit anywhere else except at her table. And he cannot go about his day unless she serves him breakfast. He cannot function otherwise. So almost in a point that he does not see her as a human. He basically just sees her as, if this woman does not bring me my breakfast, my day cannot go on and I'm going to freak out. Because of the OCD, obviously. But then we finally reach that point where both of them get a very great moment in their performances. And it's only 10 minutes into the movie, too. And these performances just come together and clash and make this big thing where we learn so much about both of these people through one interaction that's mostly just her yelling at him. It's the first F-bomb of the movie, too. When he's just so disconnected with empathy and emotion and the people around him. She's talking about how sick her son is all the time and how her son is constantly having to be taken to the hospital. And somebody makes a comment about dying, and just very casually, he's not even thinking about it, says, "Everybody's gonna die. You're gonna die. I'm gonna die." And it sounds like pretty soon your son's gonna die. And then you kind of see, there's for a while there, he just kind of keeps messing with his plastic silverware. And then finally, the pause is long enough to where he catches what he just said. And you kind of see, for the first time, that he's regretted saying something shitty. And then that brings in her big scene, when she says I'll never wait on you again if you ever mention my son again, and then the big delivery that I love. It's one of my favorite PG-13 F-bombs ever. Her very sincere, heartfelt, on the verge of tears delivery of "Tell me you understand me, you crazy fuck," to where everybody in the restaurant can hear it. And it's in this moment we finally see him kind of come to terms with, maybe that's one thing I shouldn't have said. And that is actually continued in the next scene when everything's back to normal and he's there and he's getting served breakfast and he decides to ask about her son. Ask how he's doing and what his name is, and you can tell she's still very much, dismissing him as being an asshole, which we totally understand. And he's still not exactly... It's not exactly the interaction of a normal human being, but it becomes, regardless of everything we've seen him do, it becomes incredibly endearing to see him try, and that's when we kind of really get to that point to where maybe it's possible this guy can turn around. And then he gets to the point to where Simon is robbed by the Screamcast. Simon is beaten up and robbed by Skeet Ulrich and Jamie Kennedy. Beaten almost to death. Like, he's really, really bad. He's really fucked up. And he has to start taking care of Verdell. And naturally, as you can see, he grows an attachment. And Verdell becomes like his favorite thing in the world, because Verdell steps over the cracks like he does and loves bacon and likes listening to him play the piano, and they basically just become this nice little thing. And he becomes heartbroken and even sheds a tear when Simon takes Verdell back. And then you realize just how far we've come. And the great thing about this is like everything I've just said is like the first 35 minutes. And this movie is like 2:20. This movie is 2 hours and 20 minutes. And 35 minutes in, this guy that we thought was the most loathsome person on earth has a full arc in a mere 35 minutes. A totally believable arc, too. And then the movie can go from there. The whole movie is about making this asshole, find his heart and stuff. But the fact that we can get to that point to where there's a breaking point and we see the real humanity in this guy for the first time, after everything else we witnessed in just this small span of time before the movie really even takes off, I think it's just handled beautifully. Like, that takes a lot of skill, and it's really, number one, it makes it not surprising at all this was Nicholson's third Oscar win. That's it. It was one of those, you can always tell too when you watch the videos when he knows he was gonna win. In this particular case, he danced to the stage. He danced to the podium.
Nice.
Yes, it's a really, really great performance. It's also worth noting that the dog that plays Verdell is actually a female dog named Jill. So they're Jack and Jill.
Oh, wow.
I believe that was unintentional, though. So, yes, that's really... That first 35 minutes is what makes the rest of the movie work. Is how you take this character that feels absolutely positively like a point of no return. Like, there's no way this guy's ever going to be likable.
Mm.
And then 35 minutes later, he's crying over a dog, and you really feel for him. Like I said, at this point, he's kind of warming up to Helen Hunt and trying. He's really trying to show that he's not that horrible, and that he does regret what he said about her son and all that stuff. And now he's not completely a monster. He will be self-confessed to an extent, but he's not completely gone. And it's worth noting also that Greg Kinnear also got an Oscar nomination for this. He was beat by Robin Williams, but he was still right there. He wasn't necessarily in the running because it was basically Robin Williams versus Burt Reynolds for Boogie Nights. But he's actually probably my favorite of the nominees. Much as I love Robin Williams and Good Will Hunting. I feel like Kinnear is probably my favorite of that batch. Because the other two were Anthony Hopkins and Amistad, and Robert Forster and Jackie Brown.
Was this right after Talk Soup? That's all I knew Greg Kinnear for before this movie.
I am not sure when Talk Soup was. Talk Soup was early 90s, wasn't it? This was 97.
No, this was like mid-90s.
Oh, so...
Talk Soup was mid-90s, so... I remember him being the host of
I
Talk Soup.
remember Talk Soup being in Blank Man. Isn't Blank Man like 93 or something?
Something like that, yeah.
It might be 95. I don't know.
Because Greg Kinnear was, that's how I knew him, and then I heard he was going to be in this movie, and I was like, should be interesting.
And his not only, I mean, you know, you can have your ways of looking at it, but let's be real, his portrayal of a gay man is pretty spot on.
Yeah.
But it's not just that, though. He has a lot of stuff to do here. It's a really strong performance that's got to go through a lot. Because for a while there, he's kind of... We can tell he's a bit broken inside, especially with the absolute teardown he gets from Melvin in one of the first scenes. But he seems like somebody that can take a beating until that beating is physical. And then we see him. And I like that it's another one of those cases of balancing funny and serious. The moment when he's in the hospital,
right.
And we see how he looks now. And it's sad because we know that he's a likable character and he just got the holy fuck beat out of him by somebody he trusted. And then it turns into a comedy scene when Cuba Gooding Jr. and the woman see him, and their reactions are played for comedy. Because he's saying, like, I haven't looked at myself yet, how do I look? And he takes the ice pack away, and the woman just starts crying. And then Cuba Gooding Jr. freaks out. But then the scene gets really somber when he finally takes a look at himself. And it's just this really sad moment. His delivery of "Where did I go?" when he looks at himself. It's so sad. And the way he spends the rest of the movie trying to bring himself back, even though he just keeps getting torn down over and over and over again, and even worse. Just every time he thinks things can't get worse, they do. And just watching this guy go through this is really heartbreaking, and that's really how Kinnear plays him that makes that work. You can put him in the situation and call it sad, but it's all in the performance to make it to get to that emotional point that it needs to be, and he really, really pulled that off. And then you really, really feel for him in a good way towards the end when he starts to when Helen Hunt's character kind of brings him back to not only who he used to be, but who he's kind of even further into who he's wanted to be. And it's beautiful. You're beautiful, Greg Kinnear. I like the use of the title, where it's when you kind of look at it in the long run, and you kind of see the title, and you see the happy image of him with Verdell and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. The title feels very optimistic, which is really funny because when the title is actually dropped in the movie, it's really pessimistic. When Nicholson gets kicked out of his psychiatrist's office and just kind of looks at all the patients with that scowl and just says, "What if this is as good as it gets?" It's like it's a really pessimistic use of it. So I kind of like that kind of contrasting thing about how the title is depicted and how you take it within the context of the movie itself. I will say if there's one issue in regards to their relationship, it is the fact that, well, for starters, the movie is a little overlong. 220 is pretty pushing it, especially since once they go on the vacation, it pretty much turns into they're almost gonna fall in love, and then he says something that makes him an asshole, and she hates him again. And this is kind of a continuous thing for a while. Like, every time we think he's coming back, he says something that makes him an asshole, and she leaves. And it's just back and forth until we finally get to the end. And once we're at the end, it's just kind of so sudden that you kind of think, okay, I'm glad that they found each other, and it's great. The bakery opens, and they go in, and we fade to black. Mm. But how long is it going to be before he says something to make him an asshole again? It makes you wonder exactly where this romance went. As good as it feels when the movie ends. Maybe that's what it means. Is what we see with them in the bakery as good as it gets? Or do they go beyond that? I don't know. Though I will just say in regards to her character, I don't know how this would fly today either. Because OCD is a pretty bad thing. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty serious thing. Not a single person... I mean, I know Melvin Udall's the way that he is, but there is not a single entire moment in this movie whatsoever where any sympathy is brought about with him because of his OCD. it is strictly seen as just another thing that makes him a curmudgeon, basically. And basically all the stuff he does, because he's OCD, is seen as kind of weird and off-putting to people. It's just another reason people don't like him. With the sensitivity towards this stuff now, I don't know that people would totally be on Carol's side either. That she in no way acknowledges that this is a serious problem for him, and the fact that he's lived with OCD for God knows how long might be why he is the way he is. But nobody sees sympathy with this. I don't know how that would fly today. I don't know if we were supposed to see it that way in 1997. I don't know. But if I remember correctly, it's never touched on that might be why he is the way he is, and nobody goes to that. It's all about Melvin Udall's an asshole when everybody else isn't. I don't know. So, yes. I did... When I first saw this movie, a long time ago, I absolutely positively loved it. I really, really fell in love with this movie. And then when I saw it a second time, I liked it, but I didn't feel what I felt the first time. And as I've watched it over the years since then, I still like it a lot, but it has trouble holding up. And the difference here is that I feel like Silver Linings Playbook is going to be something that might get better with age, and something that holds up on its own. It's only been 4 years, so it's hard to say if it holds up as of now, but I feel like as far as sustaining kind of a love through the years, I feel like Silver Linings might have a better shot. But I still really, really like As Good As It Gets, but it's hard to say. Because Silver Linings is another one of those movies where it kind of depends on your mood, so it's really hard to say. I didn't have a decision in mind when I started this, and I still don't.
Oh, wow.
I would say, performance-wise, I would go with As Good As It Gets. But I feel like Silver Linings in general as a whole will probably end up holding up better. But that will remain to be seen, so... yeah.
Alright. So, ends another edition of Versus. Next week, paranormal humor.
Pretty much.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. And
might as well just call it a redo.
Yeah, redo, exactly. For those of you that saw something back, we'll talk about that next week. So, check out the 7 movie review video that came out 2 days ago. Everything that you'd expect and so much more. So, a lot of limited release stuff that we're catching up on. We did our 5th Halloween Horror Nights 26 podcast last night. Check that out. And our most anticipated list went up yesterday, too. So, check that out if you're able to. Game of the Flash returns on Monday, Raw at 11:30 p.m. on Monday night. Wednesday Wrestling Podcast is 10 p.m. instead of 9:30 because of the Cruiserweight Classic. Thursday, Sip and Snack Random Flavors. And Friday, AJ's Movie Reviews, Tackles, Ghostbusters, and more. So, and yes, Saturday, it is official. Ecto Cooler is coming to Sip and Snack. So, that being said, I want to thank you guys and girls out there for watching. At Podcast Network on Twitter, Zazzle.com/Podcast Network for merchandise, Podcast Network on Facebook for the fan page. And thanks everyone for listening. As always, we always enjoy Versus. AJ seems to really enjoy Versus. So, that being said, thank you guys and girls out there for watching. And AJ, any parting words?
That's it.